listening to everyone across the world. Welcome to Medieval Mental Health Care with the creative Contessa and Dr. Johanna Dinsdale. We are here to hopefully bust some terrible myths about not just medicine in the Middle Ages and medical practice, but specifically how mental health was viewed and treated. So yeah, good morning. If you have any questions as we chat along, feel free to pop them in the live chat. If you're watching this as a recording, pop your questions in the comments and we will promise that they will be answered as long as we see that they're there. So,
absolutely. Yeah. I'm so excited to get started. I know that our last time that we talked, we discussed a lot of interesting kind of myth busting situations around mental health in the medieval times. And I felt like you really pointed out that there was a lot of myths that we thought about, specifically around like how kooky their medicine was back then, when in reality, there was a lot of good stuff happening back then.
Yeah, it is as this expert in medieval medicine actually pointed out this morning on the podcast on the medievalist.net, the scientific foundation of medieval medicine and therefore mental health was obviously incorrect. Humoral theory is not correct, but nevertheless, a lot of the treatments that they devised as a consequence of humoral theory actually were effective, because just like for example, if you're going to have a pharmacological intervention or solution, they were using that's redundant, that's an oxymoron, but herbs that have lots of active ingredients in them actually, and that would absolutely impact, your physiology. So they weren't doing nothing.
Exactly.
And in some cases it was very effective, not for the reasons they thought it was, but it was still effective.
Yeah, in their own way, right? And I guess I wanted to start off just by kind of recapping like what the humoral theory was, just in case people are new on the stream and have questions about that.
Yeah, so humoral theory, the idea, it's not ha-ha humor, although that is the origins of the word, sense of humor. Humoral theory is the idea that there are basically 4 liquids that constitute the human body. And as long as these liquids are in balance, then you should be in a good state of health, both psychically, that's a term that crops up in the original sources, and physiologically. So the humors are black bile, they sound disgusting, they are. Black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. And obviously, some of those, 3 of those are real things in our body. The black bile is not a real thing, or if your bile turns black, you're on the out.
Like, nope. Well, I gotta ask you, Contessa, what really got you into the medieval mental health? Like what triggered that interest for you, this particular era?
Yeah, so the Middle Ages, I think I was pre-programmed to be interested in the Middle Ages in any case, because my family, we grew up on the center of the East Coast in Delaware, going to all these museums with all these massive medieval art collections. So thank you, Robert Behrens. So, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the National Gallery, the Walters Gallery in Baltimore. So I was just kind of inundated with the Middle Ages and medieval history. We watched public television, documentaries, that was my childhood. I was reading Shakespeare by the age of 10. So I guess I was kind of pre-programmed to be interested in it. And
I felt the same way. I had a really big interest when I lived in England. And it's funny because in Canada, though we do have our history, it is definitely, I would say, not as interesting as kind of the medieval times era. And when I was there, like in grade 6, that was the era where they were really studying this stuff. I found it so cool. So cool. So I think that's what really attracted me to your channel as well, was it just piqued my interest again. I felt like a kid again, listening to this really interesting topic. So thank you for reigniting that in me.
Oh, well, I'm flattered. I'm honored because that's actually my purpose. My purpose is to spread a passion, love, and interest in history in general, not just medieval history. But I feel like history in school in most parts of the world is taught terribly. It is treated like a chore. It is treated like a series of dates, battles, and treaties, and great men mostly, to which no one can relate. No one feels any emotional connection to that, right? But they never
Yeah.
teach you about daily life. They never tell you what it was like to be a person living in any given era. That's how we connect, is to realize that we're not that different than our ancestors or the people who came before us.
I
So
love that. Exactly. And as a therapist too, right? I really do feel that in my heart's heart. It's like, how can we relate to people? Because that's what brings us closer together. That's how we learn how to not make the mistakes of the past as well.
that should be, it should be
It
how we
should
learn.
be. Theoretically, yes. Do you have any kind of takeaways of kind of mistakes that were made in the past during the medieval times that maybe we should implement these days?
Right. I mean, we certainly we actually learned a lot in the Middle Ages that we actually still continue to do with quarantine. Quarantine comes from the Black Death. It was the Venetians who invented the quarantine. And so that is for epidemics. When you have an epidemic, the quarantine is the number one tool to prevent the spread of the epidemic. And that's something we learned in the Middle Ages. And yet we seem to have forgotten it sometimes, occasionally. And even in the 19th century, the English doctors started saying, we shouldn't quarantine people anymore. We should just let them, because that's an infraction on their liberty. We can't
Mhm.
impinge their liberty. So, we knew things once upon a time that we've forgotten. A lot of the things that were bad, that I would say were bad about medieval practices, we thankfully don't do anymore. So we've learned those lessons. We've learned that if you're going to be soldiers in the battlefield, you need to have sanitation. You need to have,
Yes,
yeah,
that is a
right,
big lesson learned. Was
right.
that discovered in the medieval times? Kind of, oh yeah, you mentioned that in our last live stream. I think
It
it
is
was more of like
up
Middle
until the
Eastern.
20th century. Most people who died in battle did not die a glorious death on the battlefield. They died in camp of dysentery or septicemia, either
Mhm.
from the unsanitary conditions or from their wounds getting septic. So no, we didn't. Not only didn't we not learn that in the Middle Ages, how we didn't figure it out in the West anyway. We didn't figure it out
Mhm.
until the 20th century. So
Wow.
we
The 20th century.
we
Yikes.
yeah, there's a lot of things we were still doing in the early 20th century. uh, you know Antibiotics changed everything. They really did. Vaccines and antibiotics changed everything on the medical front. And that's those two aspects or those two aspects of modern medicine are two very good reasons why I don't want to actually travel back in person
Mhm.
with my body and experience pre modern life.
Really?
Yeah,
No
I don't.
way. So if you had the option, you would not
Nope.
go back in time. That is interesting.
Mm-mm. Not
Why?
unless I had,
Give me your best reasons
not unless
why.
I had my own medical kit, because
Okay, medical kit, okay.
unless I had my own little emergency supply of emergency antibiotics for everything from penicillin to gorillacillin, and a supply of vaccines.
Yeah,
And go back, but yeah,
yeah.
I wouldn't want to do it. It's just too risky. Mm-mm.
That's something that I think about when I think about the past and medieval times, how scary that must be. Like, if you get sick, you would know, okay, like, it's not looking good for me, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
that would be very anxiety inducing just in
people,
general,
yeah, people died of colds, of flus.
right?
And
Yeah,
it's not even necessarily that it's the microbes that themselves that killed. It's the symptoms that were unleashed by the infection led to dehydration. If
right.
they didn't have a way to keep your body hydrated. If the effluents are just flowing freely, you would die of dehydration, basically.
Oh my gosh.
So
Do you
now we
think
have
people are very
IVs.
Yeah. Do you think people are very accepting of the concept of, passing away since it was so prevalent in society? Like, how do you think that would impact their mental health? Was it just kind of accepted, or do you think people
No.
were just kind of miserable all the time?
No, I mean, miserable. I think people have always been deeply impacted by the passing of our loved ones. I was at a Korean museum a couple of days ago, and they found the skeleton of a little boy of about 6 from
Mm.
50,000 years ago.
Wow.
And they found flowers on his chest. There was the residue of flowers were on his chest. So 50,000 years ago, we have already started engaging in funerary practices that show that death is very significant to us, that show a connection to each other, and that the passing of one of us is indeed a very moving and probably painful time. So medieval people absolutely mourned death. And there's this weird myth. There's this myth that, medieval parents didn't love their children because their children died very young. And so they just didn't develop an emotional connection to them. It is true that infant mortality in the pre-modern era was very high. It is not true that the parents did not love them and mourn them deeply. We have all kinds of writings from parents whose children have died talking about how much they mourn them and miss them. There's the letters from Alessandra Strozzi. She loses a lot of her children to the plague, actually. She loses half of her family to the plague in 15th century Florence. And she writes letters. This massive corpus of letters of hers have survived. And she talks, every time someone dies, she writes about it, and you can tell she's heartbroken. So it absolutely was impactful. It would lead to depression. It would lead to melancholia.
Exactly, right. And then they treated that with saying, oh, you have too much black bile. And I saw that they kind of described it as your brain being cold and dry, which I thought was really interesting too, that they had this kind of description of what kind of depression would feel like within the body too, like how it kind of impacts the brain.
Right.
Stuff.
So it's interesting. There's, just like there are now, the more I've been looking into this since you reached out to me, the deeper I've been going down this rabbit hole.
Excellent.
Just like in the modern world, there are different theories about mental health. There are different theories about how to treat it. There are different theories about the causes, about the best way to approach it. Same thing in the Middle Ages. Melancholy was actually, it was called melancholia. Melancholy seems to have been a great concern in the medieval medical practice. It is addressed in numerous medical manuals, and there are, as I discovered recently, entire treatises that focus on just melancholy. I wrote down his name, Ibn Imram, in writing in the 10th century. He's an Arab doctor, and he basically synthesizes the works of Galen and Hippocrates, adding his own clinical observations in the field of melancholy, writes an entire treatise on melancholia. And he includes in it over 150 prescriptions for pharmacological treatments for melancholy, psychiatry.
No way.
It's psychiatry. And he talks about how to diagnose a patient, and he takes a holistic approach. He says you need to observe the patient for multiple days in their environment. You need to see how they live their lives, what kind of foods they eat, what they drink, what their environment, their external environment is like. And he says you need to take into consideration, you need to take a history. He talks about taking a history. You need to take a history, and you need to figure out what they were like before the melancholy set in.
No way. So they were figuring out that like childhood might connect. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean,
connect. Yeah. Did they know about how like the family could impact mental health?
All of it. It was all very important. You needed to look at the whole picture, and also you needed to know if their personality had changed. So he thought it was very crucial that if someone were very high energy before and now they're very low, like that is a form of depression. But he also said, if you're very low energy before and now suddenly you're really high energy and super engaged, well, that's mania. So he's already talking about mania and depression as being two sides of the same coin. Wow. So yeah, I was as I was reading through some excerpts from his text, I even wrote down, in case you're interested, I wrote down one of his receipts, one of his recipes, one of his prescriptions, because a medieval, for those who aren't familiar with pharmacology, before we had mass-produced drugs that come out of factories, pharmacologists, chemists as we call them, as they're called in the UK, or apothecaries in the older language, would compound a medicine. A doctor would write a prescription, which is a recipe. This much of this much of that, this much of this other thing. And they would give that to the apothecary, and the apothecary would compound it, would grind it, make it into the medicine. There are actually some pharmacists to this day who can do that. I actually got such a prescription from the ER a couple of years ago for an ulcer that had formed in my cheek, on the inside of my cheek. The doctor actually wrote an honest to God recipe for the pharmacist to compound for me.
No way. Did they send you to
Yeah.
it sounds like going to the, what do you call it, apothecary,
Right.
right?
I went to the local Walgreens and she was able to do it. So pharmacists are still being trained in this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So here is this recipe for melancholy, right? And it's going to have some ingredients. I don't even know what, I didn't have a chance to go really dig deeply because there's a lot of herbs that I don't think they're definitely not local to where I grew up.
Too,
They're
right?
definitely not local to where I grew up. So he says to take fumwort, mirobalan, and dodder, grind them together until they're a powder. Then to knead in sesame seed, almond seed, or squash seed, or violet oil. Sesame oil, almond oil, squash seed oil, or violet oil. And then to mix it with violet sap.
That sounds delicious, actually.
Right?
I would drink
right?
that.
Right? And then he says you should put it in a glass of warm water and drink it. Right? So we're talking, and if you think about these ingredients, I'm going to bet if I looked into their chemical composition, that there are a lot of really active ingredients in here that probably will impact your neurochemistry, right? I mean, violets alone are a pretty active flower, and violet oil. We're talking essential oils because the Arabs had distillation, right? So they actually had distilled essential oils. So and violet sap,
essential oils. Wow, that's the origin.
Now whether you could get those in Europe in this time, probably not. Probably they would have had to be imported. But remember, he's an Arab doctor writing about this. So this would probably be something. It would impact you, right? It would absolutely have an impact. How effective it would be for your depression, But he also
this was
talks
around the same time of medieval times, is what I'm hearing, right? This specific doctor, just in a different
10th century. Yeah, so 10th century. So he's an Arab physician writing in the 10th century, and I think he was writing in northern Africa. Tunisia, yes, right, Tunisia. He was living in Tunisia. He was living in Tunisia. So the Mediterranean, which is very interconnected in this era. And then,
just remind me, what's like the timeline of medieval times then?
So the Middle Ages, for those who don't know, I'm going to turn you down a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, got to maybe sit back from your microphone a little bit. So the Middle Ages, for those who don't know, is like basically it's the era literally between the antiquity, the ancient era, and the modern world. So more or less, it's kind of 500 to 1500, or I would personally put it as 500-ish to the Reformation in the 16th century. So those are the Middle Ages. It's 1,000 years. It's a long period.
Yeah. No, thank you for letting us know. I know it's common knowledge to a lot of people, but sometimes, if you're just joining in, especially if they're one of my subscribers, I'm not sure how much they know about the medieval times and Middle Ages and whatnot.
No, I mean, most people, like there was a small group, and then they started like infecting other people, and they end up kind of going on this procession through the village where they can't stop themselves. They're not really dancing. It's not like there was someone playing. It's not like it wasn't a dance marathon, I guess. So some people hear about it and they imagine like a really nice benign dance marathon. It was not benign. It was terrifying because they literally couldn't stop themselves. And I've read some theories that maybe it was ergot poisoning. Ergot would be is a fungus that grows on rye when the rye doesn't dry properly, and then they make bread out of it anyway. And then the fungus doesn't, the toxins from the fungus aren't broken down by the baking process, and then you consume them, and then you experience toxic effects such as hallucinations. So I've also heard maybe it was St. Elmo's fire. So there's, which we call it that because it's considered, at one point it was considered to be a curse by a saint, basically, but it's actually now a medical condition.
Yeah. I was hearing different theories about that, actually. Like, was it confirmed that that's what it was?
No. There's no confirmation. There's, as far as I know, that I don't think anyone has ever found any of the skeletons, and done any kind of actual analysis to see if they can identify a pathogen. So no, it's all theories. There's lots of theories about it. But it was very short lived. It's not like the Black Death, which kept coming back every 10 to 20 years. It was a very brief window of time. And there's one chronicle I saw from a woodcut from the end of the 15th century depicting Choreomania. And it actually shows the dancers going on to the patients going onto a bridge, and they cause the bridge to collapse from their motion, from their vibrations, according to this one chronicler. Now, granted, we're not talking about like the George Washington Bridge. We're talking about a small bridge over a creek, right? We're not talking London Bridge. It's nothing like that. But still, they fell into the creek, and apparently some of them drowned, according to the chronicler that I read.
Oh dear. I didn't hear that. I heard some died exhaustion or strokes. And I thought it was interesting too, because when I was looking up like mental health when it comes to medieval times, they're saying it might be kind of like a mass kind of hysteria type situation, which I thought pretty interesting. I mean, I feel like it would probably be more likely what you said, some sort of like poisoning or like accidental like hallucinogenics.
Parking lot. I mean,
wow.
So maybe right. So maybe we will find some victims of Choreomania, and then be able to do some kind of actual, pathogenic analysis. That would be really interesting. But it could be mass hysteria. Mass hysteria is it's an event recorded across cultures and across history. So
it's just so fascinating that can happen, right? This like psychological thing that happens, and we kind of absorb each other's coping mechanisms in that sense, right? It's like, like I just try to imagine that happening back in the day, and imagining somebody just snapping from all the pressure of everything, and they just start to dance, and then somebody else starts to dance, and then just all joining in together because they're just absolutely just exhausted. And sometimes that can create these like psychological breaks almost.
Yeah, so the time when it was happening is after the Black Death has become endemic, which means that every 10 to 20 years the plague comes back across Europe. and massive numbers of people keep dying. So, like I said, Alessandra Strozzi lost half of her immediate family, including her husband, to the Black Death.
Oh, wow.
And that's actually, the Black Death changes ideas about death. It actually makes it much more immediate. Because before, yes, it was understood that everyone would die, but once you have this pathogen that keeps coming back and will kill everyone indiscriminately, right? Young, old, rich, poor, that changes how people start viewing death, and it makes it much more immediate. It made people started feeling like death was ever present. Not just that it occasionally came for a visit, that it was always with them, basically. And that's why you start seeing in art, you start seeing death being as a allegorical figure being depicted very, very frequently. You see memento mori in a lot of art. Remember you are mortal.
Yeah, just overwhelmed by it all. So
Right.
I'm curious how they did process grief and all the death and whatnot back in the day.
Yeah, so
Any ideas?
mourning was much more ceremonial. In the modern West, we have discarded so many ceremonies, and I think to our detriment, and to our psychological detriment. Ceremonies are a way that we as humans process. We make tangible the intangible. It's the way in which we can process these abstract concepts, these abstract ideas, like life, like death. So ceremony is a way that we can engage with grief, because grief is also intangible. It has physical expressions, but grief itself is intangible. So there was mourning ceremonies, right? There were funerary rituals that were followed. There was a period that was acknowledged that there should be a period of mourning during which the expectations, normal daily life expectations, were not expected of the immediate family, right? And depending on when and where in Europe, that period could be a month or multiple months, depending on your station in society. You would wear mourning clothing, right? You would actually wear either white or black garments, depending on when and where, because there's a shift across the Middle Ages from white being the color of mourning to black being the color of mourning. And so we actually have expense accounts from the 15th century that talk about ordering mourning clothing for the whole household, not just for the Duke and the Duchess, but for everyone in the household, for instance. So there were rituals that surrounded mourning that allowed people to cope with it, to work through it, right? And it's very clear that it was not expected that you should be a fully functioning human in the immediate aftermath. Right, which is very contrary to a lot of places, like in the U.S. today. There isn't much. Not many people get a break. Time to actually mourn.
In Canada, absolutely, we're really lucky in Canada that we get a little bit more wiggle room as compared to the States. But
right.
I agree. If you had to bring back one tradition, I guess, that they had back then, kind of in the grieving process, what would you bring back?
Gosh, honestly, I think people need time, right? You need time to not have to work, maybe even to not have to clean, to not have to do anything, right? To actually allow yourself to fully feel what has happened. And that's the other thing. Oh, yes, right. Mourning, big part of mourning in the Middle Ages. How could I forget this? You'll be interested in this. Was a very, very loud and visible wailing. Keening. This is recorded all across Europe. It was not just accepted, but expected, especially in the immediate aftermath of someone dying, that they talk about people tearing their hair out, right? And that wasn't regarded as something that shouldn't be done. It was regarded as
I would say it's more of like a quiet, grieving of tears, and then you have to try to be strong, right?
It's become very quiet, and I have a theory why. It's the Protestant Reformation. Like almost anything that's bad about modern society can be traced back to the Protestant Reformation, because the Protestant, almost everything that all the different sects of Protestantism in the 16th century, they set themselves up in opposition to the church, which we now call the Catholic Church. So anything that was a common practice in the Catholic Church, we don't want to do it that way anymore, just almost as a point of difference. And I get that. I understand. You're starting something new. You want it to be new. Henry VIII's Reformation Church wasn't really very Reformation. Henry VIII's version of a Reformation church was basically the Catholic Church, but with him as the head of the church. Whereas the Anglican Church thereafter, under Elizabeth, actually became more different from the actual Catholic Church. But a lot of that, what that means is that all of those old practices of grieving were viewed as heathen, as pagan, in fact, as being a continuation of ancient Roman paganism, in some cases literally called that. And so, grieving got very solemn. It got very quiet. It was expected that you shouldn't show emotions. Like those kinds of emotions should be swallowed up and internalized. That's a big part of the Puritan movement, for instance. So, whereas in a medieval funeral,
balance, right? Do you feel like there is a balance, or do you think you should really go hard?
I mean, you should, whatever it is you feel, you should let it out. Right? Like how many of us, and I'm holding my hand up here, how many of us when we're reading a book that makes us cry or watching a movie or show that makes us cry, we just kind of go, right? That's me. I don't want to show the weakness. Right?
What's the first movie that made you cry?
God, I don't know. Probably something. Bambi when I was little. When his mother gets killed.
I didn't understand Bambi, but Titanic, that made me weep.
I understood his mother was dead. I probably, but I was a little girl, so it was okay to cry, right?
Exactly.
But in the Middle Ages, not only was it okay to cry when someone died, wealthy people would hire professional mourners, and professional mourners were literally weepers. They were supposed to weep aloud while burying your coffin to the graveyard. Like that's how important loud mourning was, that they would make sure there was plenty of crying at your funeral by hiring professional mourners. So yeah, that was a big part. That was a big part of the grieving process, was letting it out, even if it wasn't really your feelings.
Wow. Okay. That didn't happen in the medieval times, did it?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah. Professional mourners, 100%. And in fact, they would so this was a way that poor people could actually get nice new clothes. And it was a way also that the recently deceased could maybe score points and shorten their time in purgatory. They would actually bequeath in their will new clothing for 20 poor of the parish, is usually how it's phrased, to be mourners at their funeral. And mourners meaning weepers, like they should be crying. Yeah, so they would actually get a new undershirt. They would get a nice new tunic, and maybe even a robe over top, a doublet or a robe over top of that. And it was literally for the poor of the parish. And this is a practice all across medieval Europe. And they would weep.
what was the point of it though? Just to show that they were very loved, or
You
was
know, I
it
think what is the point of any ceremony? It's to ensure it's once again to score points in the afterlife, to
okay?
shorten your
So
time,
points in the afterlife. Yep.
because you're showing charity, right? You're showing charity,
Yeah.
very very tangible charity by bequeathing very expensive clothes
Mhm.
to these poor people, right? So you're shortening time and period. And in addition to weeping at your funeral, these individuals should also pray for you. So they should
Yeah.
pray to help shorten your time in purgatory. So it was a very it was a very selfish form of altruism, of
I was gonna say it's
philanthropy.
like it is altruistic, but they are getting something out of it, right? And that's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
tricky part. It's like where do we draw the line? We
yeah.
could talk all day about altruism and like
What is
whether
altruism? Is there altruism? Does
exactly
it
is
exist?
there.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's more philosophical for another day, maybe.
maybe. Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
so morning was it was loud, and I suspect it was probably very effective as a coping mechanism to really just be loud and wet and messy with it in the immediate
Mhm.
aftermath, and then to move on. Right? You know, it's a kind of purging, really, if you think about it.
It is. It absolutely is. And I think, it's interesting that religion back in the day too was kind of a way of handling these dark times as well, right? They were still
Yep.
like praying, and like that was a really strong outlet for people as well. So, not to discount that they were just feeling left alone, they still had a really strong connection with their higher power.
They did, and you know, one of the things about even modern day Catholicism, but especially medieval Catholicism, was it was very meditative because you would pray the Rosary, right? So you have beads on a string that where you have 10 beads are our fathers, and then you have a Hail Mary, right? And then you're just going through repeating the same prayer over and over and over again for a fairly long time. And as you know, that's meditative. That will put you in a trance-like state, which is
So true.
relaxing to your mind, right? It's actually
Right.
relaxing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, sorry. I do have some questions from
Yes,
my folks over here.
yes,
Apologies.
absolutely. No,
The
no, absolutely. Lay it on. Because unfortunately, so everyone, I just want you to know, I'm not ignoring the live chat, but the live chat froze like 40 minutes ago.
Oh no. Okay, no
So
worries.
the last, oh wait, and then it just started again. I hate you, live chat. Why are you, why are
Why are
you
you
like
like
this?
this? I know technical difficulties are the bane of our existence, let's be honest. Okay, so do you think David asked, do you think if people from that time or era woke up earlier in the daytime, and do you think that affected their mental health? Added that
So
part up at the
that's
end.
that's a great question. So actually, this is something we should read. One of the many aspects of daily life from the Middle Ages that I think would benefit us is a medieval sleep schedule, and that is because in everyone, I don't care whether you were a laborer or a peasant, which is a farmer, or a merchant, a craftsman, lord, lady, king, queen, people woke up basically with the sun, right?
Wow. Yeah.
They woke up with the sun because this is a pre-electric world. There are no electric lights. Lighting is expensive, and also, you know, yes, oil lamps can actually be very bright, but you need a bunch of them to create really good light. So most productive work is going to be done during daylight. You're not going to do a lot without daylight. And there were guild statutes that forbade items to be produced during to candlelight or to lamplight. You had to have daylight to do embroidery, to make clothing, to make items, because it was acknowledged that daylight was the best light. So most people woke up with the sun, and they would.
Interesting. So they weren't able to do that. It was just to protect their eyes, or was there another other
It
reason
was
for that?
quality. I mean, it was quality of work, right? So
Oh, okay.
the quality. It was acknowledged that the quality of embroidery that was done to lamplight or candlelight was going to be significantly less than embroidery that's performed to daylight or created with sunlight, right?
Right.
So it was to protect the quality of the products that were being produced by members of a particular guild, so that they could actually ensure their socioeconomic status and their economic place in the hierarchy, right? But that means that people didn't purposefully try to get up at dark to go work. They got up with the sun. There's also no street lights. Like most places don't have torches that are just set out and left burning all night to provide light. That's expensive.
That's a
and
really good
also
point.
possibly dangerous to just leave torches burning all over your city where your buildings are made of wood. Just saying.
Yeah,
You don't.
maybe not. Exactly. I can
So
totally understand why they would just go to sleep then and take their time there. Okay, so you're saying
and
it would
yeah,
probably,
and
honestly, I find that when you look at the studies, most people who are morning birds actually have better mental health as compared to those who are night owls, which I'm guilty as charged. I'm a night owl myself. But yeah, there is something to be said about kind of waking up with the sun, getting things done in the morning, while things are peaceful and
yep,
calm.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
And then you've heard of you must have heard of biphasic sleeping. Have you heard of biphasic sleeping? In the country being an agrarian society to a factory-based society in the 19th century, and so that changes the sleep schedule entirely. And also then we have gas lights and electric lights, which allow us to work late into the night and get up really early in the morning. And so we've basically, electrification has probably been really bad for our mental health.
Yeah, probably, right? The circadian rhythm gets confused and everybody's affected with it. Screen time, absolutely. If you guys have that night setting on your
Yeah,
phones, I
use
would
it.
highly recommend that too.
Use it. Use
There's
it.
a reason why it's there.
Mine goes on tonight at like 9 p.m. and it's it's so much better for your eyes if you're going to be on a screen, which you really shouldn't be, but whatever.
It happens in this society. I don't know about you, but it's very hard to escape. Um,
I'm the problem is a lot of the things I'm reading are like reports, journal articles, and
yeah.
around 8 p.m. my brain starts going, "Ooh, let's read some new journal articles." So I'm like on Gestor reading journal articles until like 10 p.m. or 10:30, and my brain just doesn't want to shut down. It's like, oh, more information. Let me consume more information. I don't doom scroll. People always ask me Ryan asked me, like, did you see this video on Facebook? I'm like, no, baby, I'm a content creator. I don't have time to watch content.
There you go. Exactly. So much the same. But I am guilty of like scrolling and getting stuck in the scroll at nighttime. It's a problem. Sometimes you need
It's
some good ideas, right? Every once in a while, do a little bit of research. At least that's what I tell myself. It's probably not that. I'm just doom scrolling. Right? But anyways, unfortunately, guys, I do have to wrap up at 9 o'clock here. So I just want to kind of wrap things up with saying thank you to Creative Contessa again for this fun live stream. This was always very insightful. And again, if you guys want to follow me too, Johanna Dinsdale, you just look me up on YouTube. Yeah, just to wrap things up though, I guess I want to go back to what you were saying. You wouldn't go back in time without a medical kit, but if you could go back in time, what would you want to be back then?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean,
would you want to be
yeah,
a
that's
knight?
no, God, no. Nights, what a brutish life. No, nights. Knights were very likely to die pooping themselves to death in a battlefield somewhere. So I'm
All
not
right, maybe not the best.
I'm not terribly into that. No, if I, who would I be? Being a noble woman is really the way to go.
A noble woman.
If
Yeah.
you're gonna want to be a noble woman. That's going to be it. I would probably not. I want to be a queen. Depending on when and where, being a queen is actually not a bad gig in Europe. It's actually a good gig. You can actually have a lot of power, especially if you're in the Iberian Peninsula. Queens in the Iberian Peninsula reign in their own right. Unlike France, where in the middle of the Middle Ages, they pass laws that say that women can no longer inherit the throne and be queens regnant. But on the Iberian Peninsula, there were many queens regnant, and so I don't know. It might be nice to be a queen regnant in the Iberian Peninsula. Also, the Iberian Peninsula is super sophisticated with infrastructure and technology because basically the Roman infrastructure never broke down, and then the Arabs come and bring more high tech infrastructure. And so it's this really advanced place. The cities are beautiful with running water and beautiful baths everywhere, bathhouses everywhere, gorgeous architecture. So yeah, probably maybe Iberian Peninsula, queen, not a bad gig.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. I think I might steal your idea. Noble woman, definitely not King Henry VIII's wives. I would say no to that gig for sure. But thank you again. And guys, if you want to continue on this stream, I think you're going to stick around for a little bit longer, right?
Yeah. I'll stick around for a little bit longer. But everyone, check out Johanna Dinsdale's YouTube. She's also on Instagram. And make sure to subscribe. And I keep forgetting, if you guys have been enjoying this, double tap that screen to like. Beyond subscribing. Yeah, remember engagement. Well, Johanna, I think I personally, I still have so much information to share. Would you like to do this again next week?
Yeah, 100%. Let's do it. Friday, 8 p.m.
Yeah. Same bat time, same bat channel for those who get that reference.
Lovely. All right, guys. Well, take care and multi goodbyes.
Okay. See you later, Johanna. Okay. Good. For those, I apologize for all of the freezing, everyone. I've got to find a different broadcast service. Anyway, were there any questions? So I missed all of your questions and comments because of the way the stupid live chat was working for me or not working for me. So do any of you have any questions before we part ways? Otherwise, I will be coming back on a little bit later at some point today with a medieval sewing party. And I'll be working on repairs to my medieval kit because, as always, wear and tear happens. So I'll explain what I'm doing and continue to chat about daily life in the Middle Ages with you all. So yeah, any final questions, everyone? And the reason I want to end this stream is because Restream keeps freezing. So I'm going to come back on in a little bit with, I've got to go get my sewing supplies. I didn't bring them with me for this mental health care live stream, but any final questions? I'll go ahead and take a chance. Yeah. What was Ayla's question? Ryan's sharing with me. The whole section on biphasic sleeping was cut. Okay. I will try to talk about biphasic sleeping again. Biphasic sleeping. Is this the Amish channel? It is not. Everyone drink, everyone. I'm not Amish. 15th century French actually is how I'm currently dressed. Susan, if you hit your notification bell, it should notify you for the sewing party. Give me 30 minutes. I'll need 30 minutes to go collect my stuff. Right. So biphasic sleeping. Let me explain biphasic sleeping to you. Biphasic sleeping is basically the process by which your body naturally sleeps according to the rhythms of nature. In essence, in the Middle Ages, people would go to sleep usually around sunset, a little bit after sunset, right? Not too long after sunset. They would sleep for several hours, 4 hours, maybe longer in the winter, less time in the summer, wake up in the middle of the night. Everyone would. They would get up, they would chat with each other, they would maybe play games, they might have a drink, maybe a piece of bread, maybe do some kind of house chores or something that doesn't require a really strong amount of light. And then they would go back to sleep, and they would sleep until dawn or until their bodies naturally woke up, which was usually around dawn. And there was no alarm clock. There was no forcing yourself to be awake before your body should naturally want to be awake if you're healthy. And that was the rhythm of life, basically, as far as I can tell, before factories. And of course, also before businesses started having business hours like we kind of recognize them today. Yep. So that, yeah, biphasic sleeping, for those of you who fight insomnia, it might be something you might want to consider, is actually sleeping, letting yourself wake up, doing some things, and then until you get sleepy and then going back to sleep. It might be better than trying to fight yourself to stay asleep when it's probably not actually going to happen. Question, how common was opium use in medieval times? Not recreational opium use in Europe didn't exist as far as I can tell. Poppy juice was medicinal, and it was used as anesthesia. It was not consumed. It was not consumed recreationally, and that's because it was recognized that it could easily kill you. Because in the Middle Ages they hadn't yet isolated morphium, the morphine, the actual alkaloid that is the active ingredient in poppies, and they hadn't yet regulated it so that you always had basically the same amount of the active ingredient in a dose. So it was acknowledged that sometimes poppy juice was really weak, and sometimes it was so strong that it would just put you in a coma and kill you. And there are actually surgery manuals from the Middle Ages that talk about using poppy juice as an anesthesia for surgery. And they say specifically that you need to, I'm not making this up, you need to slap your patient in the face once an hour to make sure they do not sleep too deeply during the surgery. And by which they mean sleep too deeply, go into a coma and die. So no, there was, as in Europe anyway, I have not seen any evidence in the Middle Ages of recreational opium use. Alcoholism was recognized as a problem, but it wasn't as easy to become alcoholic because they didn't have distilled liquor yet. Distillation of alcohol for drinking doesn't really become a thing in Europe until the very end of the 15th century. And it still takes a while before it becomes a big prominent practice. Alcoholism is a consequence of drinking distilled spirits, doesn't really become an issue until the 17th into the 18th century. So yeah. Ayla says, did they have any concept of what hallucinations were? You mentioned it earlier, and I wonder if they thought them demons or bad spirits. What would they think of schizophrenics? Yeah, so actually, that's a great question, Ayla, thank you for asking. Contrary to popular belief, the automatic assumption by medical professionals and by leaders, even by churchmen, was not that someone was possessed by a demon. If they were schizophrenic, if they were exhibiting insane behavior, right? If they were hallucinating, if they were suffering from delusions, the first assumption was not that they were possessed by a demon or infested by a demon, as it was framed. They actually thought first that it was a humoral imbalance. And for an just like today, for an exorcism to be performed, they would actually send an expert in the field from the church, and he would do an in-depth analysis, and we have records of this. Very often, it was determined that the individual was not infested by a demon, and therefore an exorcism would be unnecessary, that instead their behavior resulted from disease, from a physical disease, which we now know is true, right, from a physical disease. And therefore it was prescribed then that either a physician should balance their humors, or if they couldn't afford that kind of treatment, then they should go to a saint's shrine. So yeah, they understood that there was a concept of hallucinations being something that you were imagining, not something that was actually that you were seeing that no one else could see. There was that concept. I mean, there was also the idea that sometimes they did believe that you were infested by a demon. For instance, if you started speaking in tongues, they kind of thought maybe that was a sign. If you were speaking a language that you couldn't have known how to speak, that to them was a sign that you were either you were infested by a demon or you were being manipulated by a demon. And so there were some people who did believe that hallucinations were actually deceptions made by demons, right? So they still believed you were suffering, and that there was obviously something wrong, but they believed that a demon was basically doing, trickster magic to trick you into seeing what you were seeing. Again, not necessarily that you were infested by the demon, though, just that you were a victim of an attack by a demon. And again, the treatment was basically the same. Go to a shrine and pray to a saint, especially one who specialized in mental health issues. And there were saints who were recognized as dealing specifically with psychic illness. Saint Dymphna is one of these saints in France, has a shrine in France, actually. Yeah, that's a very good question. And yeah, schizophrenics, Henry II was probably schizophrenic. He suffered from catatonia, right? He actually had a year where he entered into a catatonic fugue. Henry VI of England. Sorry, Henry VI of England. So yeah, that's a great question, Ayla. Thank you for asking. Yeah, poppies will put them to sleep. So what you are not saying, okay, question. So you are not saying that opium fights insomnia? No, opium was not, I'm not saying anything about what opium actually does now. I'm saying that in the Middle Ages, it was not used recreationally, and it was used medicinally for a lot of different things. But insomnia was actually, insomnia in the Middle Ages would have been something where you haven't slept for days and days and days. And then in the Middle Ages, would they have prescribed opium juice for insomnia? Maybe. I'm not an expert on all of medieval medicine, right? I haven't looked into, treatments for insomnia specifically. Fresh Prince, thank you. Welcome to my channel, eating some cheese and crackers. Oh, what are the humors? Yeah. The 4 humors are blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Oh, and by the way, they actually believed that one of the reasons they thought that cupping would work to help rebalance your humors and bring you back to a state of health, and that let me see. Stephen Collins, appreciate that. I love Monty Python's Holy Grail. I have a model of the Black Knight that the limbs come off of. That's awesome, Ayla. Oh, Stephen, yeah, I appreciate that compliment. Okay, everyone. Are there any final questions? I'm going to go and try to get my sewing. So we're going to end the stream here because this one keeps freezing, or it did keep freezing. Has it? Okay, so here's a question, everyone. Since Johanna left, have we had any freezing issues? Actually, I might keep the stream going just to see if just as an experiment. We are back. Okay, so apparently we froze again. Okay, thank you, everyone. That will give me some information to give to Restream. Okay, guys, I am going to end this stream, and I'm going to come back a little bit later, maybe in half an hour, with my sewing supplies, and we'll get the sewing party started again. Okay, everyone, thank you for tolerating the freezing. The gremlins just do not like me. Remember to like and subscribe. And I'd like to thank my patrons and my channel members and my Facebook subscribers for supporting my work into researching and recreating medieval daily life and being able to share it with you all in this manner. Okay, everyone, hopefully until the next half hour, otherwise until the next live stream. I'm not certain if I'm going to be doing a medieval cooking party this weekend or not. I really have a lot of sewing I need to get done in preparation. But I do need food in general, so we'll see. We'll see if it makes sense for me to do a medieval cooking party this week or not. Okay, everyone, hopefully until soon. Until then, may your explorations in history